Well, everyone, it's time to talk about another Microsoft console, and this time around, it is the Xbox 360e. Now, this, I will tell you, the whole entire Xbox genre is one of my favorite consoles ever. They are solid consoles, although they kind of got, Sony and Nintendo kind of had a head start in the beginning of their phases. I will tell you what Microsoft was able to do with the Xboxes, even at that time, especially with the 360s, but even with the Xbox Ones and the Series X and S's, I think these are solid consoles still. I am such a huge fan, and ultimately, I am happy with the way Microsoft went ahead and made the 360 and made the One and 1S and all these consoles. Now, I don't think that's saying much because these things sell like hotcakes all the time, so let's go ahead and see how the Xbox 360e was actually one of the cooler consoles Microsoft made, in my opinion. And obviously, I've talked about a lot of these consoles. I've already talked about this console last year, and although not much has changed, it's always good to kind of look back and see what these consoles brought. Now, the original Xbox 360, which I'm sure a lot more people know about, that one actually was released in 2005. So that was the main successor to the original Xbox, and I'm going to be completely honest, the jump from the original Xbox to the 360 was a bigger jump, in my opinion, than the 360 to the Xbox One and even the Xbox One or One X to like the Xbox Series X and S. I'm going to be 100% honest. And it's crazy because the 360 was such a solid console, but it needed those iterations. It needed those type of, little changes here and there, from the 360 to the 360S and the 360E, because it wasn't the best it could be when it first came out. There were a lot of storage problems. There was the red ring of death. That was a huge problem in and of itself. And those are some things to keep in mind. Now, with the 360, the original one, it cost $299 when it first came out. In other places, it cost a little bit less. It went up to $399, and I guess they, decreased the price because they needed more people to buy them, but they were able to sell these things like crazy anyway. Now, with the 360e, this was, I guess, an update to the original 360 and then the 360s. So the 360e came out in 2013. Now, if you guys remember, this was that one console which pretty much brought a little bit of an updated motherboard. It was supposed to be faster than the, previous versions. It was also made in a couple different storage variants. So the base model was 4 gigs of, storage, which is crazy, 256, 320, and then 512, and then 500. So you had a couple of different storage variants you could choose from. Obviously, I would not recommend buying that base model, but to be honest, maybe some people would say they wouldn't recommend buying this console in general anymore. So that's kind of a different thing to keep in mind. Now, on the exterior of this console, it definitely wasn't like an ugly looking console, I don't think. Now, some people weren't really super happy about it, but I was kind of, impressed by it. On the front, you had that Xbox 360 logo with, that, disc slot, which I'm sure everyone knows about. You have the eject button, power button, and you also had that port selection on the front. Now, on the sides, you had the fans, and on the back, you had a ton of different ports you could choose from. So you obviously had that AC power, and you had an HDMI port, Ethernet port, you had a headphone jack, which was pretty interesting. You had the Connect port if you wanted to use the Connect, which people kind of forgot about. And it also had those USB ports on the back as well. And overall, although, other consoles like even the original Xbox 360 kind of had more ports, and this thing wasn't that bad, and I don't think it was really a crazy big deal at the point, and to be honest, this thing didn't really sell a crazy amount of units anyway. People who already had a 360, they were pretty much going to the 360S for the most part, and I do think people were just keeping their 360 until it broke with Red Ring of Death, and then they saw this and they're like, oh, we might as well buy it. I think that was kind of the main reason why a majority of people even bought the E at that point, especially when it was so close to being released with the Xbox Ones. So that was another pretty big thing. I mean, it was announced at the same event as the Xbox One, so there wasn't really a huge reason to pick up the 360e unless you wanted to buy, like the older generation console and the game selection that you get from that. And that is one of the bigger reasons why I always look at older consoles versus even the newer ones. Even right now with the Xbox One and the Series X and S, like I mentioned before, it's going to take a couple of years for this next console to actually go and, pick up steam, and the more people who have their hands on it, the better it's going to do in terms of game developers making games for it. With an older console, you look at the Xbox One, if you have no console right now, picking up even the original Xbox One isn't that bad of an idea because you have all those games that you can play on it. Now, it's not going to perform as well as something like a Series X or S, but it's still not going to be that bad if you have no console. There are tons of games you can choose from even with that Xbox One. So that is a humongous thing to keep in mind. I, for one, I'm not somebody who's just going to go and play the newest games every single time. There are a lot of older games that I like. And when this 360e came out, I feel like some people were in that same ballpark. A majority of people like me think, why would you buy the older one? You can buy the new one. But people forget that you can go buy the older one, for a little bit less. And you have all these games you can choose from. Some people actually prefer playing 360 games than one games. Now, I don't know who those people are now, but there's going to be a time, depending on the Series X and S, some people may prefer playing, the one games more than the X or S games. So that's another thing to keep in mind as well. Now, some of the main features that this thing was pretty much kind of, running for was the fact that it was a smaller console overall than the 360S, which actually was a smaller console than the previous version as well. Now, Microsoft also removed a couple of different features with this specific console as well, which kind of, threw people off. And you also lost one of the USB ports on the front as well. So this console had 4 USB ports, where some of the other consoles actually went up to 5 USB ports. So that was kind of another, disadvantage for some people. But overall, I think the 360E sits at a very interesting spot. I think it was pretty underrated, but the whole entire 360 lineup was not underrated. This was a very good selling console. Microsoft did a great job with this console overall, and I think they really won that, war against, them and PlayStation, even though the Wii, outsold everyone. And this was a solid console, and I'm like super happy about it. But like I mentioned, a majority of people are going to look at this console, and I don't think people are really going to buy it. And the main thing, and probably the biggest disadvantage I think with the E, is that they announced it and released it with the Xbox One. It really just doesn't make any sense, for people to buy the last generation of console, even if it is cheaper, when the new one is probably right around the corner. And we can even say the same thing about phones or laptops. It's like, why would they go and release, a older laptop when they announce the new one at the same time? Even if it's different price brackets and stuff, it just really doesn't make any sense. So that was one reason why maybe the 360E didn't sell like crazy, but also like the PlayStation 3 Super Slim didn't sell crazy either. So when people already have the main generation of consoles and they go to like the last generation, there really isn't a crazy reason to go pick up the, last generation of consoles if you still own like the first one that came out. Even with the Xbox One, I always think about this, and even with the PlayStation 4s, these companies, Sony and Microsoft, did a much better job at advertising and developing better iterations of consoles. With, Microsoft, at this time, I think it was a little different, and even with Sony, but once the PlayStation 4s and the Xbox Ones came out, there are some pretty big differences from the PlayStation 4 to the PlayStation 4 Pro, and same thing with the Xbox One to the Xbox One X. There are some massive differences for sure, and I think at this time they didn't really do a great job at kind of making each iteration like a crazy big difference. I think they were trying to make every console smaller and just kind of look different in each generation. You look at the original PlayStation 3 and the Super Slim, those are massive differences. You look at the Xbox 360 and the 360E, not so much of a difference. And I think Microsoft kept that same design with the next generation, which were the ones. And I think they did a great job with the ones as well. The E, I think it was great. I just think it was pretty underrated. And I think they didn't really do a great job at, kind of showcasing the features that it had. And they also eliminated some features as well, which kind of threw a lot of people off. So I think that's pretty much how the 360E holds up in 2021. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.